Thank you all. Great to see some familiar faces and great to meet many of you. I'm always fascinated at the number at how wide-ranging an audience we tend to draw for this conversation. And it is definitely more of a conversation. Aaron, was that just for me, the reaction side, or was that?
Yeah, I was giving you a warm welcome.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So this is definitely more of a conversation. We'll go through, just some of our own structure and frameworks of how we actually deliver our service, but more importantly, it's to answer questions that you have as you're thinking about what you're doing or what you're looking to do next. In addition to my role in ProCFO Partners, because we weren't busy enough building this organization, Lou, we had also spun up a separate full-time recruiting company. Not because we particularly were going after being in the recruiting world, but number one, our clients kept asking us for help. And number two, we got tired of cleaning up the mess from bad recruiting because we found that most recruiters do not understand the finance and accounting function. And Bill, it sounds like that's something you've probably lived numerous times just listening to what you're doing now. So for this conversation, just to start things off, we actually have a whole bunch of very senior financial leaders here in this room. So I'll start this off the same way I usually do, which is many of you have been a CFO or worked with or for a CFO. So what does a CFO do? No, it's not a trick question. I'm generally curious what your, what the initial response or description would be.
Wears about 5 different hats.
All right.
Strategy, control, treasury.
Okay.
I would say he or she is an advisor to the board and CEO, partner to operating management, and a key contact to the financial community.
Good. Anyone else?
Someone who can execute on the strategy.
Okay.
Actually, someone who can also participate and contribute to making the strategy.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in on it? See, I'm always fascinated when I ask this question. I've given versions of this presentation probably close to 200 times, both in front of financial leaders as well as directly in front of business owners. And I'm amazed at how varied the answers get. I mean, yes, we definitely get some really fun and wacky ones, especially when you're talking directly to business owners. Because when I ask a room full of business owners, how many of them have a CFO, and a third of them raise their hand, and then I ask them, great, what does your CFO do? Usually the same two things happens almost every single time. The first is dead silence in the room, and the second, you see a look of panic on about half the business owners who raise their hand, like, oh, I hope he doesn't actually call on me. But then when you actually start getting into some of the answers we get, it is again how varied the answer is. I'm going to say it's no longer shocking, but it certainly was when I first started getting into the conversation. When one business owner says, what does your CFO do? I almost got a visceral response from this particular business owner, and it was, annoy me. I'm like, okay, I think I may have touched a nerve over there, in that relationship. Probably might be helpful if we have a longer conversation afterward, but or we have one, we don't have a CFO, we have a CF no. We had another one bother me about gap compliance. I'm like, okay. And then you get into all the varied definitions. So we have our own definition of it. When we were building out our own firm, we started this company in January of 2020. When we started, it was me, my business partner, and 6 CFOs, and now there are close to 70 of us on the team. Yes, we decided 2 months before a global pandemic is a great time to launch a business, by the way. You'll hear some more of my background as I weave it through the conversation we're going to get to today. But in growing the organization, one of the key things we had to identify first was defining what is it that we do in a systematic and a unified manner. And we'll go through some of that in the initial part of this conversation, as well as how we actually talk about delivering service and answer any questions you have as it relates to what you're looking to do next as well. Jump in with questions. I try and keep this more conversational than strictly a presentation, in large part because speaking as a participant in these things, I'm very rarely in the mood to have someone just present to me virtually. So jump in with questions. I'll try and keep it as entertaining or as engaging as I can. So in starting off the conversation, again, we spoke about what does a CFO do. So it's funny, we actually did some research on this. Lou doesn't want to let me share my presentation, so I'm just gonna, oh, there we go, okay. Doesn't trust me anymore. All right, fine, no. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, yes, we did make the Inc. 5,000 list last year as we've grown as rapidly as we have. But when we talk about what is a CFO, you can leave it to the International Federation of Accountants, for those of you familiar, to come up with an overly wordy but utterly meaningless definition of the role. If you're extremely bored, feel free to read it. Just for reference, I'll say this once and probably several times throughout. I will share the full deck with Lou. Lou, you can share it to whoever showed up here or whoever registered for this as well. Feel free to share it. So you don't need to take pictures of the slides. There are a few of them, which I definitely have had people take pictures of, nor do you feel the need. I also will very rarely read out a slide full of text because I'm not a big fan of that as well. What they did move on to the definition, and this part becomes really key, and some of you referenced this as well, of how the function has evolved. Many of you have been doing this long enough to have actually lived that evolution. For myself, I used to joke about how it was my very first CFO role was my responsibility to make as much money as possible come in and as little as possible go out. That being said, obviously the role has certainly evolved, where it used to be just a gatekeeper. Now you're expected to participate in driving the organization towards its goals. And some of you referenced this key point of this level of role. Deloitte wrote about this. This article is actually back in 2014. There was a whole article about it. Whereas the traditional role was certainly more the operator and steward. I'll call it loosely, this is probably where the role was more centered 20 to 30 years ago. And really what the role is being called for right now. It's funny, when I showed this to an early CFO mentor of mine, he laughed and said, yeah, we used to just call them good CFOs and bad CFOs. So the point is the role has evolved, and that's all we'll spend on that side of things. But when we talk about the actual financial function of an organization, many of you have lived the different versions of this. So we start talking about what the different layers are and levels are, and this becomes important because no matter, when you're thinking about your own role in an organization or your own service you're providing to people, some of these pieces begin to get important because you get asked all different kinds of questions, or, well, we have this bookkeeper, what do you do? Or we have this controller, how is this going to help? Or we already have an accountant, I'm good. Especially when you talk about business owners or communicating messaging side of things. So one of the first things we tell most people when we're delivering or talking about our service is that at a certain level, none of the titles here matter at all. And when I say that for the clients that we serve, very often it's just us and a bookkeeper or us and a bookkeeping service. Where some of our largest clients, there's 20 people in the finance and accounting function. The titles don't matter. What does matter is everything on the impact side, which we'll get to in a second. Just by way of context, and I'll share this. So yes, we work with companies as small as funded startups pre-revenue, and our largest clients have been close to $1 billion in revenue. And they get last count in 28 or 29 different industries, and that number seems to keep growing because they keep making up new ones. So you name it, we've probably been involved in the industry in some way, shape, or form. But when you talk about the impact, this is where the differentiator becomes clearer to see, and more importantly, clearer to understand what our role is and what the company, what the organization needs to be built like that's actually going to support the growth and goals of the organization. And then when you line them up together, obviously it drives the point home a little bit more.
Leave that there for a second.
Yeah. For most companies, they have somebody doing tasks. What that looks like above them is where companies and organizations tend to get lost. And when we're operating as fractional CFO, and I use that term broadly because, again, very often when I'm speaking about who we are or what we do, yes, we're all CFOs. Yes, everyone on my team has been a CFO before. We don't necessarily refer to ourselves even as fractional CFOs anymore because CFO title within this space to a certain degree has become meaningless because it means something different to everyone. So when we talk about the role, it's more about the impact that the role should have, which we've now moved to defining with one or two simple statements. It's our responsibility to build, manage, and lead the finance and accounting function so it supports the growth and goals of the business.
Say that again.
It's our responsibility to build, manage, and lead the finance and accounting function so it supports the growth and goals of the business. And it is every part of that statement that is truly crucial. Many of you identified the strategic part of it. So us to understand and to drive what the goals of the business are, and therefore what needs to be built in this function that's going to support that growth and goals.
This slide is really dramatic. I've probably seen it before.
No, there's a new version of it, Lou. I don't think you saw this one.
Maybe in a different form, but the statement that you just made about, you know, what the CFO's role is even more dramatic, because it truly is what we all do or aspire to do.
As organizations grow, and many of you have lived this, again, there's really three layers for many organizations across this function. There's task, manager, and leader. And what we find and where companies struggle is when they expect one person to be able to do all three, and they get frustrated when they can't or won't, or they're not getting the value they need or want from each layer of the function. So for a very small organization, can you have one person who's playing the controller level or manager level person and leader? Sure. But you want that person to do journal entries as well. Somewhere along the line, you're not getting the value you should be as a business owner or leader. Or if you're providing the service and you're being asked to do all of them, you certainly get there as well. So I'll contextualize a little bit about my own background for this side, and please feel free to weigh in with your own experience across these pieces as well. This isn't just a lecture. Back when I used to work for a living, which is how I jokingly refer to when I was a full-time CFO, so it's probably going back close to 15 years, which is about how long I've been in this fractional CFO world. I think it was since before it was cool to be a fractional CFO, because now, I think looking across this room, you can't walk about a dozen feet without tripping over 3 fractional CFOs these days. And to a large degree, I think that's a good thing, because it speaks to the business owner desire and appetite on what they're looking for to help support their own businesses, and therefore the services that we get to provide. So my first foray into this world was, again, I was happily employed, at least I thought happily employed as a full-time CFO, and a friend of mine reached out to me and said, a friend of his is having some trouble with his company. Can I have a conversation and maybe give him some advice? And help out a friend of a friend? Sure, why not? We'll have a conversation. And that conversation ended up turning into a year-long interim CFO role that I actually juggled with that full-time role. So it was a ridiculously busy year. But what I found by doing this, and I use this word so carefully, and for those of you who have entered this arena, know what I'm referring to, and I say it was so much more fun working like this. I learned a new business, new company, new industry, and the things that were day-to-day in my previous role was like magic to a company like this. And so deciding this was a whole lot more fun, I went back to the full-time role, converted it into a part-time one, and then started doing this on my own. I first did this on my own for about 7 to 8 years across a dozen industries, from startup to $500 million in revenue, and I loved it. But I ran into some problems when I started doing this on my own. And for those of you who have been doing this on your own or are starting to do this on your own, will definitely recognize what this looks like. When I did this on my own, I kept running into some variation of the same 3 challenges again and again and again. Number one, it is very difficult to develop and deliver at the same time. When you're working on your pipeline, it is difficult to be delivering for clients. When your dance card is full and you're working on your clients, it is difficult to maintain a pipeline, which therefore leads to problem number 2, feast or famine. You're either way too busy or not busy enough. But it was the third reason that probably set me down the path where I found myself going, and that's that you're as an independent or as a solo, you only have your own experience and expertise to offer. So occasionally you'll run into a business owner who says, well, have you worked in this industry before? Now, for those of you who've been doing this long enough, know most of the issues we're helping companies solve have nothing to do with the industry that they're in, but it is definitely an objection we've occasionally run into. But the flip side to that is you don't have teammates or colleagues to bounce ideas off of. You only have the things that you've done. And so in looking for ways to do this bigger and better, I went looking to find an organization that was doing this bigger and better. And I did not really like what I found at the time. I found the franchise model, which after 1 or 2 conversations, I pretty much asked them point blank, what exactly am I buying from you besides an email address? And I did not particularly care for their response. And I found the loose association model, which again, I think has some benefit or value for what I had already been doing as an independent for 7 to 8 years. I felt it was very little value for me or for the clients I'd be working with. So that eventually led me down the path. I did join one organization that was actually based in the UK, very large in the UK, and they were trying to replicate their success here in the US. It did not work at the time, and over drinks, cigars, or advice of your choice, we can get into why it did not work. But it was there that I met my business partner. She was actually working in the Chicago area, so we actually have a team in that region as well. For the 3 of you, I think it was, who talked about their presence and home base in Chicago, and we kept having some variation of the same conversation over and over again for the 2 years or so that we were there, and it was something along the lines of, "Is this really the best way to do this?" And best was not about our own egos. Best was, is this best for our team, or is this best for our clients? And when the answer kept coming up no, we were basically faced with a decision. We can either stop complaining about it, or we can go build it. Now, you've heard me speaking for close to 15 minutes now, but I highly doubt I strike you as a type of person who will stop complaining about it if I found a problem. And so in January of 2020, we launched this business. And when we launched, it was me, my business partner, and 6 CFOs. And then we've grown the organization to where we are today. So some of the pieces I'll continue with are some of the tools and frameworks that we've built as we've scaled this organization to be able to deliver systematically, sustainably, and scalably for our clients. As we built out our organization, we have CFOs in 12 states, and I've had clients in 41 states just in the 5.5 years or so we've been running. So I don't like sharing some of that as it relates to what we're going through over here, not because I enjoy speaking about myself. I actually don't. But as it relates to this, if it comes to going back to this level of conversation, many of you who have now entered or dabbled in the fractional CFO world have all come across a situation where you're asked to do more. We're all different layers and levels, and it becomes how are you navigating that situation where you're communicating the value you're providing versus what the owner thinks they need or want from you. How many of you have dealt with that already? You can speak up about it. That's all right. You don't have to be shy. Frank, I think I saw you raise your hand there. You're muted.
All right,
There
I
we
think I'm there.
There we go.
No, it's just a sort of expectation delta and expectation type conversation. I mean, there's an element almost in every role, I think, of what non-finance people or CFOs versus sort of business leaders expect, and so I think upfront articulating what you see as the deliverable is critical, and making certain that there is alignment between yourself and the let's call it the business owner or leader. I think is critical, because once you get going, the fog of war sort of keeps you busy, and any difference you may have may get ignored until it's a problem.
Yeah.
So that's how I sort of try to deal with it up front.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
Sure. So I was actually a divisional CFO in a fintech, and we decided to launch a joint venture with someone else who had started their own company, and we're trying to build out this this new platform. And that founder was, wanted things their way. I was their CFO of the joint venture, but I was also a divisional CFO of an S&P 500 public company. They wanted to do things their way, and they said, I don't care what your corporate wants. I want to hire this. I want to fire this. I want to do this. I'm going to go get my own money. And it's like, I need to tell you where this is going to come from, right? I will get you the money, but you can't do it this way. And that was why are you even here? Like, what kind of advice are you giving me? Why can't I do what I need to do? What kind of, CFO are you? And I had to explain to them that public companies have rules and you can't it's not the Wild West. So I spent more time arguing about that than I did actually helping him build $100 million business.
Thank you. Anyone else? Rob?
I'll just say, being on the smaller side of things, where it's myself and one or two other people, that the expectations are really high because they want everything from a controller, CFO. I've been in positions where, it's like, okay, why didn't you do this? I mean, how many different things do you think I'm going to do at the same time and not drop a ball anywhere along the line? So, that's my point of view there, and not really that they didn't really have any concrete expectations. Is just that I would do everything. That's all. And so that situation is tough on the small side.
Yeah. We work with quite a few organizations at the much smaller end. Yeah, it is. And this goes back to, I think some of you referenced it. For us, it is a lot about the education up front. which is why some of the tools that we've developed, we now trademark to be able to communicate this systematically as an organization of what is it that we're actually doing when we support organizations. What is the value and the impact we're driving for them so we can contextualize our responses in education. So Natick, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but it's becomes, so we're not spending our time arguing with them throughout the entire engagement around this, so much as we identify this is the objective and our role in helping you support this objective. This is how we're going to actually go ahead and do this instead of thinking go back and forth.
Alignment up front, I guess, right?
It's education even more than alignment for many business owners. Most business owners and founders, while they're really, really good at delivering a product or a service, running a business, unless they've done it successfully previously, and many times even if they have done it successfully previously, doesn't necessarily mean they're actually qualified business leaders.
Yeah, I guess another sort of potential area of conflict I see is strategic versus roll up your sleeves. And people seem to want, to the point of one of the earlier speakers, want everything, and and only so much is possible, based on resource and time and so on. So
and that's very true. I find a lot of it goes back to some of the education piece up front. We're going back to the statement I made earlier on the CFO's role is build, manage, and lead the function or anything specifically about doing journal entries. Story I share about this is the running joke in my firm is they don't let me work directly with clients anymore. Apparently, I'm supposed to be building and running the company now, so they don't let me work with clients anymore. So back when they used to let me work with clients, I was working with one small manufacturer actually in North Jersey. And this particular business owner, about the second day I started with him, says, "Oh, can you speak to the bookkeeper? She had some questions." Sit down with the bookkeeper, and apparently we discovered in about 5 to 10 minutes of speaking to her that they started selling directly on Amazon and did not know how to do the journal entry for the Amazon reserve. So they just stopped doing bank recs about 6 months before they started working with us. Because apparently, by the way, if you ignore a problem, it goes away, which is so for that particular one, solving the problem was pretty straightforward. It wasn't me rolling my sleeves and doing the actual entries. It was sitting for 20 to 30 minutes explaining to the bookkeeper, this is the structure of the journal entry. Send me a screenshot before you post it. I'll review it to make sure it's correct. Let me know once it is posted. I'll log in and review it. And then she cleaned up everything inside of 3 weeks.
Nelson, if I may ask a question. So I'm not familiar with, I'm trying to understand more about the fractional CFO role. So are they something which is, let's say, specifically task or deliverable driven, or are they for a time limit or what? And how do they kind of go about it there?
So for our engagements, usually we're setting the level of engagement, but very rarely is there a deliverable. I mean, we do projects quite often, whether it's an assessment or, again, I see you over there talking about on the mergers and acquisitions side. We've done some of those deals, on the diligence side to support those kind of things, and that there's a specific deliverable for. But for the most part, it is an ongoing level of engagement that's going to drive the results. We have created our own kickoff and onboarding process supported by our client success team to align around immediate objectives and goals. And this way we can support our team when they're working with their clients instead of it's just, oh, you need a CFO, here's a CFO, thank you and goodbye. I'm sure you'll figure it out. It becomes a process of how we're supporting our team in supporting our clients. And that's built off of the decades that we have of doing this. And with the early adopters within our organization who joined us early on, what are those best practices and identifying it so we can systemize it as an organization. Everyone on our team has been a CFO, but working this way is very different than almost all of our backgrounds of where and how we worked previously.
That's true. That's true. Thank you very much.
So,
Nelson,
sure.
I think that it all comes back to your graphic, right? And the leadership and strategy being at the top, and having a CEO or a business owner who is willing to allow you to do that. And I think that part of your process is designed to enable that business owner to allow you to lead and strategize.
Yeah.
Because
Well, we actually tell them very
you can't execute on it.
Absolutely true, Lou. And thanks for pointing that out. I mean, for us, it's also one of the points I make in our sales process when I show this graphic in the sales process. It's not that the CFO just sits there with their feet up on their desk providing strategy. It's the CFO's responsibility to make sure everything on the impact side is being delivered for the organization. Not to do everything, to make sure everything on the impact side is delivered for the organization. Because as CFOs, as financial leaders, if the books aren't done, there's, we can guess at certain things. We know lots of other things we can advise on, but obviously without the data being clean, without the books being clean, there are limits to the insight that we can provide based on that. So we need to make sure the books are done correctly. And that's where it becomes, if it's not being done the way it's current, if it's not being done to the level the organization needs now, what are the solutions we can put in place? We've helped outsource, we've helped insource, we've trained and mentored staff, sure. If they needed new staff members, again, if it was at a level where we felt we can help, we've done the recruiting side of it through our other company. But to your point, Lou, it is about making sure we're delivering the entire function for the organizations to drive the impact they're looking for. Jeff, I see a hand raised.
Yes, thank you for thank you for keeping on this slide, because this is exactly what I was going to talk about. So let's say in my past organizations, the companies did not do, let's say, the lowest level, okay, meaning task at the bottom level. So have you ever, and are you at the point where, let's say, obviously you're building up the levels, hey, we're addressing the systems, we're addressing this, we're addressing that. Have you ever turned down a position or a role / responsibility because they are, I guess, at too early of a, let's say, part of from where you to get in?
So we definitely have turned down engagements in general, which as we've grown to a certain size, we certainly have more of a luxury to do so. I mean, my very first early days when I was doing this on my own, I would probably not have known to turn down certain things. And I certainly took some things I probably should not have early on when I was first doing this as a solo. But as it became about building out the organization, it becomes not just, oh, can we help this client, but can we set our team member, our CFO, up for success in this engagement? And then it becomes truly understanding what that looks like. So that is something we actually assess in our sales process, is where is the organization up to from this side of things. Very often, if they're not ready for this, or if they don't have that piece, then one of the key things that we'll start with as a priority is how are we going to help them fill that role or seat or impact that they're lacking currently. It is not for us to do it. It is for us to help them figure out what is the best solution to them to do this. At the same time, and to your point, when we had one of our prospects say, oh, we're ready to work with you, let's get started. And we said, no, you're not ready for us yet. You need a bookkeeping solution first. Let me introduce you to 3 of those. I think this one's the best fit. And we'll talk again in 3 months and see where you're up to at that point. And then we can see if it makes sense for us to start. So it is finding that right balance on what our role is in driving the impact here. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we'll cover a couple more pieces on some of our tools and frameworks that we use. But again, please continue to jump in with questions. It'll prevent me from getting bored. No, I'm kidding. It'll be more interesting. And if it's something that you're thinking of, there's probably other people who are facing similar questions as well. We chose to represent a lot of what is it that we do, with the flywheel concept. We like the flywheel concept. For those of you familiar with Jim Collins, we like the flywheel concept for a couple of reasons. Not just because that demonstrates what's next in the function, but if you take one of the pieces out, the whole thing stops. And that's what helps us use this as almost a diagnosis tool for many organizations. So this is what the whole thing looks like in general, but we'll go through some of these piece by piece to see how this gets built and what this actually looks like within an organization. When we start thinking about systems and processes, think of this as a foundational area of almost every organization. How do they bill? How do they collect? How do they process payroll? Who do they bank with? All of these pieces really come into this area. What is the foundational elements of just the financial operations of an organization? It's one of my favorite quotes on banking in general, by the way. For those of you unfamiliar with that one. Systems, obviously, yes, we get involved with which system our clients are actually using. Me personally, I have had the privilege of working across nearly 24 ERP platforms. And the one thing I will say with absolute certainty is they are all terrible and they're all wonderful, every single one of them. Which system the company should be using is a lot of it comes down to what is it they're trying to do and what is the best system that can get them that response. Anyone running a product-based business obviously outgrows QuickBooks early on because QuickBooks can't manage inventory. So what are they using? Are they using a plugin to manage inventory? Usually not. At that stage of the company, they're managing inventory in Google Sheets and Excel. And it's like, okay, there's a point in time when that works for an organization. And there's obviously a point in time when that no longer works for an organization. So what are those next solutions to support that growth and goals of the organization. Yeah, this is foundational, and this is also for those of you who've been with organizations that scale and grow. This is also the area that they outgrow quickly without recognizing the challenges of outgrowing it. So very often, that payroll solution you put in place 10 years ago is now the wrong payroll solution. But is that really a priority of what you're going to focus on now in changing this? You always have there's always more priorities and other things you can be focused on. So reviewing this on a somewhat regular basis becomes a really key part of the role as an organization scales. Because there are more solutions out there, not always just strictly about cost. I mean, yes, you need to manage costs, but we'll get into that shortly. As a CFO, it surprises most people when I say you cannot cut your way to growth. You absolutely need to manage costs. But it is one of the things that we will absolutely ensure in organizations that we serve. But don't bring in a CFO just to cut costs. But from the systems and processes side, we look at that reporting. And this is where, again, most people think CFOs live. And our perspective is just one component of it. When we think of reporting, it is not just about having more reports. We live in a world where we can get a report on almost everything we want these days with just a click of a few buttons or clicks of a mouse. Reporting is about insight, and there's a very big difference between having data and having insight. Data can just, is your scatter plot on this side of things. Information, knowledge, insight, wisdom of actually how to act on it. And if you take it over the top, obviously, you end up somewhere there. But this component is really, we like this graphic, and we've been using it for a while already. Lou, you've seen the early iterations of this when I showed this graphic, if I'm not mistaken, but it really does highlight the real difference. You can always have data. When I was talking to a business owner, he says, "Oh, no, my controller, she's the one who gives me my KPIs every month." I said, "Great, she tells you what they were?" "Yeah." I said, "Good. Does she ever tell you what they should be?" And you see this business owner just freeze and then start frantically taking notes. We can report on lots of things of what's happening in a company. What should you be reporting on? What actually is the insight we need to drive the decisions that we need to make? And this doesn't happen in a vacuum, which is why the second half of that statement becomes really key as well. What are the decisions that we need to make, and what is the insight we therefore need to make those decisions? When we're talking to a business owner, for instance, after I gave this presentation, actually, in Chicago, for those of you in Chicago, again, just referencing this particular story, not because of the people who reference Chicago, just that's where this story happened to happen. I gave this presentation to a group of about 40 business owners, and one of them, in one of the exercises we went through in the afternoon, we spoke about, planning and KPIs that they should be tracking. And I said, for this business owner, of course, there are some generic, KPIs they can give you to look at, but more importantly, where are you trying to take your company now? What is it you're trying to do over the next 2 to 3 years? And he says, all right, we're trying to double in 3 years. I said, great. And working through this example in probably about 10, 15 minutes, I was like, okay, what needs to happen for you to be able to double in 2 to 3 years? I don't know if anyone's worked for those kind of business owners who are always like, that is one of the most common ones we hear is double in 3 years and 100 million in 3 years. For those of you who've worked with those kind of organizations, those are probably two of the most common ones we hear. But for this particular business owner, I was like, what needs to happen? Because business owners always say we want to double. It's like, great. Can you sell more? Can you deliver more? Just saying you want to double doesn't really mean all that much. So for this particular business owner, what we worked through this example was, in order for them to double within 3 years, they have to buy a new factory, they have to buy a new plant, build a new factory on it, retool it to what they're going to be delivering, because they're trying to expand it geographically, and that's where a lot of their growth was going to come from. And so for this particular business owner, one of the KPIs we developed for them was, great, if that's what you need to happen to double within 3 years, this quarter, what do you need to be doing to support it? And for this particular business owner, meant someone on his leadership team had to be doing 3 site visits a week. That became a KPI that they needed to measure. That became one of the reporting tools that they looked at as an organization to support their growth. How many sites were they visiting? Because they recognized if they did not buy this property within 6 months and everything that was involved in there, that became one of the metrics that they tracked. Yes, there are financial metrics. Yes, there are profitability metrics. Yes, there's a lot of things we look at from a reporting perspective. But we have to back up the conversation to what is the insight we need to make the decisions that we have to. Any questions or comments, by the way? Okay. So from reporting, we look at cash. Yes, you will notice this goes in order on purpose. If you don't actually have the systems, let's go back to this one. And go all the way back to this one here for a second. If you don't actually have the systems, then what you're reporting on is going to be meaningless. We spoke to one company where 2 years before they started working with us, they spent $750,000 implementing a new ERP. And that implementation had gone so poorly that by the time they were speaking to us, they were back to managing their projects in paper folders. That's how poorly their implementation went. But then at the end of my first conversation, when he asked me, great, should I send you my financials? I said, you can, but frankly, from what you've shared with me, they're meaningless because your information is incorrect. It's just you're not using your system and it's not going to capture any of the information you're looking for. But once you actually do capture the information, you can report on it, then we can actually start looking at this because cash management is obviously more than just how much money is in your bank. It is how are you managing this and what does your cash flow look like and sources or uses of funds as you're looking at the growth and trajectory of the organization. Talking to one of our CFOs today, he's like, yeah, this particular business is extremely profitable. They have no cash. Okay, great. Because the scary part is this statistic listed here, this 82% of businesses fail. I actually think this number is low. If any of you have actually worked with an organization that ended up closing its doors, it's almost always the final reason of why they actually do so. So building actual cash flow forecasts very often is one of the quick tools that we very often start with, is because if they don't have one, that's one of the easiest things to start with for many organizations. That doesn't mean it needs to be 100% accurate, but it gives them some foundation to actually start looking ahead. From cash, you begin to look at profit. Now, profit is where things get really interesting because you ask most business owners, like, okay, how are we increasing profit? Almost everyone thinks about cutting costs. And going back to the statement we made earlier, you cannot cut your way to growth. Yes, costs need to be managed. Yes, there's plenty of opportunity to manage costs and new ways of looking at it. But the mindset of just looking at cutting isn't the right mindset to support true growth for many organizations. So we start thinking about pricing. How many of you here, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second. How many of you here have approached pricing from a strategic perspective to really drive the growth of an organization? Yeah. Pricing has a much greater impact on profitability than cost cutting does. So what does pricing look like? When I give this presentation to business owners, very often I have a little bit more fun with this. I'll ask a room full of business owners, okay, how many of you have raised prices within the last 2 years? Almost everybody raises their hand. Within a year, still most of the hands raised. Within 6 months, sure. Within 3 months, okay. Now we're down to far fewer. And then the question that trips almost all of them up is, okay, how many of you here have an active and dynamic pricing strategy instead of just reacting to your costs? Usually only 2 to 3 people in the room actually raise their hand. So again, as financial leaders, that becomes far more important for driving growth and profitability in organizations. What is our pricing strategy? Where does our position? And this very often ties into the overall strategy of the company. And this is where the pieces begin to fit together. A company that's a premium product, obviously has more pricing power. We worked with one organization that had a product they were selling. When we started working with them, they said, no, our product is the best one in its space over here. We can't sell it. We can't communicate it. We need new marketing. We need new this. And we started going through this, and what we found in their space was basically 2 tiers of products. There was the cheaper products, and there was the premium products. The problem was they were priced too expensive for the cheap products and not expensive enough for the premium product line where people were looking at it. So for this particular business, we actually said, great, create 2 products off of the same thing that you're already making. Make it slightly cheaper on the luxury side, but then have the one which actually competes with the cheaper side, just on better quality. And they actually grew by 40% the next year. The pricing strategy definitely needs to tie into the overall strategy of the organization, but we can't just be reacting to costs. I mean, right now in the current environment, we definitely need to be reacting to costs. For those of you dealing and navigating what's currently going on and the direct impact of costs changing right now. But for many, that's the pricing strategy does need to tie into the overall strategy of the organization. But again, you can't make these decisions without actually understanding this, and that's where profitability comes after reporting. Same thing. You have to understand your current margins to be able to understand what is it you're trying to drive. Yes, most business owners, they can give you some basic margin metrics. Usually it's gross margin and net margin. Start asking about, unit economics and geographic economics and service line, that's when you start getting the blank looks. For those of you dealing with companies that are product, try and get a fully laden burden cost for most business owners when you walk in the door. Oh, well, our COGS is this. I'm like, okay, does that include this? Does that include it? Well, for that, we have to look at this metric or this report to be able to calculate that. Again, it's the insight that becomes important. If you understand all the different components of profitability, you can make the decisions. Because if you know everything this is what it's going to cost you, you can say, great, should we keep doing this? Should we develop another product line? Should we put more marketing dollars? Should we hire another salesperson to do this? Should we open up another region? Those are only decisions you can make if you truly understand the components within an organization. How we communicate this as financial leaders are, I believe, one of the keys to our success. Again, questions or comments on this? We'll go back to the deck. Now we get into the fun part of the conversation. So when we think of the C-suite level conversations we get pulled into, this is where we actually, yes, drive the most value. And many of you referenced this when we started the conversation. And this is obviously where I do believe that as leaders, we provide the most value. It is at the strategic level. The quote I have listed there, I still have listed as attributed. I don't know about all of you, but I actually read through most of the Franklin papers. I don't think he ever said anything remotely like this, but most people say he was the one who said it, which is why I still have it listed as attributed. If anyone does know for certain either way, please let me know. I'd love to update it. But for right now, I just listed as attributed. The strategic part of this conversation becomes really key because it gives us what is it that we're trying to help businesses or organizations or corporations really do. We say growth, sure. How much is growth? For some businesses, that's a 10% growth, and that's great. For others, they want to double every year. That's great too. What are the pieces we need to help to build that support that? Going back to where we started the conversation, build, manage, and lead the function to support the growth and goals of the business. Understanding what the goals are over whatever horizon we're comfortable with helps us understand the conversations we need to be having to drive that growth. Budgeting is one of my favorite conversations, right? You ask so many businesses, do we have a budget? It's like, yeah, we have this. You know, we go through this about every so often. Then we actually put this down on paper. For most businesses, and I'm sure many of you have been through budgeting cycles like this. I know I certainly did early on in my career. Most businesses approach budgeting as, sure, we take last year's numbers and we add a percentage for what we think we're going to grow this year, and this is our budget. Whereas when we start thinking about it from our level of conversation, it's like, okay, where's the company trying to go? And where do we need to be investing this year that's actually going to help us get there? That's our budget. How are we going to measure if that's working? How are we going to know if this is actually going to drive those results? How are we going to measure the success of this? Budget is a living document. Budgeting is a strategic document, because without that goal in mind, budgeting can look something like this.
Yeah.
So when we think about the organization, where it's trying to go, this becomes really key to understand for us as, frankly, as financial leaders, full-time, part-time, any which way we're actually approaching our role. Understanding the goals of the organization is really, really key. It lets us anchor our role. It lets us, provide our own roadmap for how we're going to support it. And for us in ProCFO Partners, we've developed some of our own tools for how we actually can unpack that early on in engagement, because we don't have 3 to 6 months for due discovery. We have a couple of days. So we've standardized our process to be able to onboard and kick off with the client inside of 1 to 2 days, with our client success team supporting the CFO in those kind of conversations. And the last component before we go back to the full model is the revenue model of an organization. When we think revenue model, we're thinking, what does the business actually do? Who do they do it for? What are the problems they're really solving in the marketplace? And we're not looking at it from the marketing side of things. We're truly looking at it through the financial lens, because how we react and how we inform decisions are really important. Which customers are we going after? Again, the conversation we had earlier about pricing came from actually looking at the revenue model. Who are their customers, and what are their channels to their customers? If their customers, if they're only going after the cheaper customers, then yeah, they can't be the one that's 25% more than everybody else. It became like, okay, is that really our customer, or is our customer anyone who needs this? We're trying to solve this problem. Then it became great. Then who else has this problem? We should go after the luxury customers. Then it became adjusting our pricing to actually be able to go after this. But the best example I give of this one is was an organization we were supporting, and their entire business was delivering fresh produce to restaurants. Sizable organization in its space. They're actually in the Midwest. And you can imagine what happened to them in March of 2020. Overnight, their entire business disappeared. But when we started looking at, okay, as an organization, what is it they really do? Are they a produce delivery company, or do they have a logistics infrastructure that happened to be used to be delivering produce? Just that level of conversation allowed us to recognize, okay, there's a lot of other needs for this kind of infrastructure that we built. And so they shifted to last mile delivery. Again, for those of you who remember the early days of COVID, we needed everything delivered as early as we can for those kind of things. So they shifted to a lot of last mile delivery and replaced, I think it was about 80% of the revenue inside of, I think it was 6 or 7 weeks. Again, understanding what is the problem we actually solve, what is our solution, becomes really, really important. And this takes us back to the full model on this side of things.
And you just hit on something in terms of like the whole chicken and egg problem, if you will, right?
Yep.
Which comes first, so yeah, you've got, your goals and strategies. Do you have the systems in place to meet that? Or do you have the systems in place first, and can your goal and strategy fit the system that you have? So
it's funny, and it is a great balancing act, Lou. It's a great point. I mean, our perspective on it is we need to understand where the organization's trying to go, so we can look at the system to say, okay, it doesn't mean it's a day one priority to adjust the systems and processes, but we need to understand, are these the systems and processes that are going to help us get there? Or just think of the general operations of a company. Again, going back to that small manufacturer I referenced earlier. Yes, he wanted to grow by 50% the following year because he think as a business owner, he was driving most of the sales and he can sell more business and he's really excited. And I called him out of his office and I walked out to the platform that he has overlooking the factory floor. And I said, do you think you can deliver 50% more from this factory?
Well, I think that part of this is why this is not a linear presentation.
No, it is not.
It doesn't end. It's continuous.
Not only that, but we're trying to figure out a way how to make this three-dimensional, because these are not just sequential to a certain degree, but they actually tie to each other as well. I mean, we worked with one company that ran into cash flow issues because of the accountant they were working with in the systems and processes side. Like it's all these pieces really are intertwined with each other, and none of them go back and forth.
Great point.
We built it this way as a way of being able to describe it and illustrate it. And when we work with clients, we actually will go through these different pieces and components as to what it means, because now it becomes, this is the framework that allows us to deliver for our clients systematically, sustainable, and scalable. For those of you who do like the linear presentation of this, and yes, we actually go through, I have this side of it as well.